amongst all the countries. So often, I know Dubai gets talked about a lot, and it's hyped a lot that it's tax free, and everybody wants to go there just to save taxes. And
You and I have many friends who moved there.
Iranian diplomats in various countries in Asia have been very active in conveying their message about this war and garnering support of citizenry in those countries, particularly from the Shia denomination of Islam.
In India, in Kashmir, women have donated their own gold ornaments. People have donated gold, silver, cash, all sorts of things. And the same is true for Shia communities, not just in India, but across much of Asia. There was also another fear amongst the Israelis, and that was that if the Iranians got a bomb, then Saudis would certainly get a bomb. Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Manu Sharma, a partner at FOI. He's one of the leading geopolitical analysts in India and from India. Today he'll give us his overview and his analysis of the Iran war, especially its implications on the Gulf. Welcome, Manu.
It's a pleasure, Atul.
All right, Manu, without further ado, give us an overview. What's going on?
Well, it's a royal fight between, I would say, two thoroughly different military ideologies. So the assumption on the US and Israeli side was that Iran was thoroughly weakened by 4+ decades of sanctions, a rather deleterious multi-year war with Ba'athist Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and then later on, various multilateral sanctions which were imposed by other countries in conjunction with what was already there from the US side. So the idea was that it's an unpopular regime in Iran, propped up by force and, let us say, agencies which were paramilitary, and they were enforcing a rather orthodox version of religion over an unwilling populace. And the protests on the streets of Tehran, on other, I would say, in other major towns, sort of validated that idea. And I think, informed by that, the military planners thought that perhaps Israeli government was sufficiently weakened, and if a sufficiently powerful external shock is delivered, then the government would fall apart. Now, why is this important? What's the need to remove that certain government? So, as per the Israeli and the US calculus, Iran was aspiring to be a nuclear power. It has medium enriched uranium, which, if enriched further, can produce nuclear weapons. And once it does have a nuclear umbrella to provide, then it can basically get its proxies in the region to act as its enforcers and sort of create a proxy empire in the Gulf, which would basically lead to the wider Gulf and its oil production and gas production capacities coming under the influence of the Iranian government. So to avoid that sort of a result in a few years down the line, I think the planners, the strategic planners in both the countries decided that perhaps the time was now, and they should attempt a takedown, so as to say, of the government.
Bibi Netanyahu, sorry to interrupt, Bibi Netanyahu said in a legendary interview, if not us, who? If not now, when? He summed it up very pithily.
Well, I would say originally this thought was perhaps expressed in a setting that was non-militaristic, but I guess somehow they've changed the context and
Yes.
and spun it around to basically initiate the conflict. Now,
there was also another fear amongst the Israelis, and that was that if the Iranians got a bomb, then Saudis would certainly get a bomb, the proliferation fear. And therefore, it was extremely important to nip the evil, or nip the weed in the bud, I suppose, nip the problem in the bud, to be more precise. And therefore, uh, Iran had to go, or the regime had to go. And yes, you're right. There was an assumption, I'm sitting in Washington, that this regime was highly unpopular, particularly with women. B, it was facing mass protests. C, it had killed thousands of its own people. D, economically, it was a basket case. Inflation was raging really high. And E, there was enough discontent within the country that the military would not be in a position to fight. So you're absolutely right. There was an assumption that Iran was in a position of weakness, and this position provided a unique opportunity, and therefore the time to strike was when the iron was hot.
Yeah. And given the fact, given how the region is and the resource asymmetry, and let us be clear, when I say resource asymmetry, it's basically distributed among both of the sides. So when we talk of US and Israel, there's only a certain amount of population and certain amount of military resources that can be brought to that theater at a time. The the resources may be considerable, but there is a limit to what can be brought to bear in that theater for both US and Israel. Similarly, for Iran,
Let
the
me let
situation.
me just stop you 1 second and tell viewers who don't follow military matters very closely, but in fact, uh, what Manu means here is that yes, the U.S. has 800 military bases. Yes, the U.S. is wanting a 1.5 trillion dollar defense budget. All of that is true, but the U.S. is extended all the way from Venezuela to Japan. Americans have conducted a magnificently spectacular operation in Venezuela. That took a whole lot of resources, and now they have the Donro Doctrine, or the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, that's in the national security strategy, which we have analyzed at great length and in great detail. At the same time, there's a very strong belief in Washington that America should protect Taiwan, and the Taiwan Strait deserves attention. And America has bases in Japan, in South Korea, and so on and so forth, not to mention bases in Europe and as north as Greenland, which was a subject of control. America is hugely distributed with a global footprint, and it cannot just withdraw everything and focus it on the Persian Gulf. Over to you, Manu. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Same with Israel. Israel has to deal with Hezbollah just north of its border. It has already moved up the Litani River. It's got to deal with Gaza, southwest, in the southwest corner. Egypt is still around. Syria now has Jolani, or Ahmad al Shara, in his new incarnation, backed by MIT, Turkish intelligence. And Naftali Bennett, one of the contenders to be prime minister, has said, well, we'll have to worry about Turkey because really the Turks are back after a century of being outside of Syria.
Yeah.
The Ottomans, or the new Ottomans, are back.
Yeah,
So
the new Ottomans.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the Israelis also can't throw the kitchen sink at Israel, at Iran.
Iran.
Over to you.
Now, yeah. So the US and Israeli calculus was that if they do a shock and awe tactic and do a decapitation strike,
Mow the lawn, as they say.
no, I would say that's like a sustenance strategy for later stage. The later stage of the conflict, but the initial conflict was about that. Let us take out whatever is the elite
Yes,
of
decapitate the
Iranian
Ayatollah
government.
himself.
Yes, take out all of them, cause confusion, cause dissension in the ranks, and perhaps the country would fall apart. Now
But the
here,
regime certainly would crumble.
indeed, I mean, like for 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 now we'll use the terms interchangeably, but I guess yeah, the regime would fall apart. Uh, but Iranians were also looking at what could happen, and we must not forget that along with India, they are the originators or co-originators of the game of chess. So they did have some strategies
Shatranj,
ready,
as it is called in the eastern part of the world.
and chaturang as it was
Yeah.
called in India back then. So they thought that, okay, fine, that this is most likely how the opening rounds of a conflict would look like. That basically a kitchen thing would be thrown at the regime or the government, and then the expectation would be that people would rise up amid the confusion, and basically the thing would be over within a couple of days or more, give and take, a day. Now, to undercut that US and Israeli strategy, Iran planned a decentralized offensive defense doctrine. So they said, let's have a mosaic defense, which basically meant 31 independent commands, decentralized commands of military forces led by the IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces.
Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the
Yes,
Praetorian
Victoria
Guard of
Guard.
Revolution
Yes,
because
yeah,
after 1989, the loyalty of Artesh was in question. The
yeah,
Are the armed forces that were loyal to the Shah initially, at least, and
yeah.
therefore the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was the sword arm of the new Islamic Republic, not just to project force outside, but to ensure that Artesh wouldn't overthrow the new regime.
Think of them as playing the dual role of what the political commissars used to play in the communist armies, and at the same time also being good at war fighting. So the political commissars of the communist parties in the former Warsaw Pact had dubious, I would say, war fighting credentials, but they did have good ideological and political credentials. Over here, you have both of them at play simultaneously. So what that does is that it makes this force not only ideologically committed, but also at the same time a pretty decent fighting outfit. And that sort of forms the core of the defensive doctrine of the Iranian government for now. Now, this Mosaic doctrine was there for the military, but the civil side also needed something. So for that, the government went for what's called the four-layer strategy, which is basically to have four layers of redundancy at each level of government appointment. So that, for example, if you have the supreme leader, which inevitably it happened, the supreme leader being, assassinated, then what would they do? So they would have four candidates, four cadet leaders in the bench strength, one of whom would take over.
So
And
basically, what Manu is saying is,
no, no,
if
wait,
Manu is,
wait a minute.
yeah,
Wait, just to add to that. Now, in addition to this, now what if all the four layers go away, right? This is where the differential between the rest of the Arab world and Persia or Iran comes in, which is that Iran, as it stands today, or the Iranian regime as it stands today, is a theocratic form of government. It's a theocracy. It's not a dictatorship. It's not a democracy, obviously, full democracy, and neither is it what you can call a quasi monarchy or something. So it's a theocracy. The theocracy means that just like the Vatican, if you have a pope, then you have cardinals, then you have the bishops, and so on and so forth. Similarly, in Iran, you would have the ayatollah or the grand ayatollah, and then folks below him, then below him, an entire pyramid of clergy out there, and that leadership pool will exist even if, let's say, all the four layers of the cadet leadership also gets wiped out in the initial or the mid I would say, in the mid sort of stage of fighting. So this makes the Iranian government rather good at surviving, at taking the blows, at taking the initial hits from the US and Israeli military, I would say, strategy. So this is where we stand so far in
Very
terms of.
quickly, let me explain the level of four again. So, what it simply put means that, let's assume you have a unit and you kill the commanding officer. The next commanding officer is already designated. You kill that person. Then there's a third person to take that person's place. You kill that person, there's a fourth person to take that person's place. So, for all key positions, this level of four doctrine exists, which makes mowing the lawn, as the Israelis like calling it, or Americans like calling it, a little difficult, because how many times are you going to mow the lawn? Then Manu's point about a theocracy is very important, because as one of our Iranian friends, an analyst with deep understanding of Iranian history and philosophy, pointed out, that this is the first time in 1300 years that the Shias have their own state. The first theocracy, the Safavids in 1510, were not really a theocracy. They were a dynasty in power, like the Mughals. In fact, they patronized the Mughals and helped them come back to power in 1556. But the Safavids never were a bunch of mullahs running the entire country. For the first time, you have, like the Vatican, during its heyday, a theocracy, and there's a mullah in every village. And so the regime has a very deep pool and a very wide pool of clergymen able and willing to replace those who die. So it's a much deeper problem, as someone said it. An American officer said it off the record. Said, this is like cancer. It is not that you can go in and have open heart surgery and you are one and done. Over to you, Manu.
See, again, in interest of, I would say, fairness to the Iranians, they have forever been a civilization that prizes intellectual prowess, and they've been fairly consistent in their pursuit of intellectual refinement. And it was expected of them to have a robust plus intricate, even if, formed a rather different version of religion than, let's say, what the mainstream would perhaps believe in. But what they have been able to do is create something, or to put it in simple terms, it's a bit like Windows, Linux, and the Mac OS. You have different operating systems. So this government, this regime in Iran
Windows,
has
Linux, and Mac.
Mac. The differential between that. So they have a
Or
different.
iOS.
Yes, Mac iOS, yeah. So they have a different operating system, and based on that operating system, they've been able to, achieve whatever they have politically, which is to achieve survival against what would arguably be the greatest and the biggest and technologically the most advanced military campaign against an adversary so far. Like, we haven't really seen this kind of warfare being waged against a state, and that state not crumbling, within days of it. So, in that way, the political side of the things seem to have worked for the Iranian government so far. Um, when it comes to the US and the Israeli political management, I would say they've also worked well so far, that there is considerable support for the conflict. Yes, it's not unanimous. Yes, it's not maybe perhaps the most popular of wars, uh, but still, I would say,
I'll stop you, Manu. The
mm,
war is popular in Israel. It's there's
okay.
It's extremely popular in Israel. And even those who oppose Bibi Netanyahu
mm,
irrevocably
mm,
support the war.
mm,
I say that uh, after speaking to a number of people in Israel and the Israeli security establishment. However, the war is not popular in the US.
mm,
It's a tale of two countries, very different perceptions, very different reactions. And you could argue that their goals when it comes to the Iran war, apart from the elimination of the regime, the future state of the country, are very different. They do not converge. There are divergences. So
mm.
it's complicated when it comes to Israel and the US now.
Yeah, that's why I said that so far we haven't really seen a unanimous rejection or acceptance in the US. And I would say uh, that's still an okay state of affairs, compared to, let us say, there have been fairly unpopular wars in the past,
It's not
which
Vietnam yet, to put it simply.
exactly, exactly, yes, that's what I was alluding to. That's not where it seemed to be headed for now, but who knows? So politically, that's where we stand. I think it's a draw as of now. Yes, the political structures in the US and Israel have stood fairly well with the military agenda, and same has been the case with Iran. And that's a very dispassionate view, I know, that there is a prevalent thought that says that maybe perhaps there is a lot of division within Iran, and people are divided, and there is a whole lot of bickering going on within Tehran. From what we've been hearing and seeing in India, that for now is not the case. And a very good passive indicator of that is the activity of the diplomatic corps. The Iranian diplomats in various countries in Asia have been very active in conveying their message about
Mm.
this war and garnering support of citizenry in those countries, particularly from the Shia denomination of Islam. And they've been able to, mobilize not only opinion, but also, I would say, significant for the people concerned, amount of money and material as aid as humanitarian aid for the people of Iran. So on that
Well,
perspective,
I'll stop you just a moment. In India, in Kashmir, women have donated their own gold ornaments. People have donated gold, silver, cash, all sorts of things. And the same is true for Shia communities, not just in India, but across much of Asia.
yeah, and just for the Western audience, gold is a very sentimental asset in Asia for women. They generally don't part with it. I mean, it's even said that a husband would get divorced before he could even ask for gold from his wife. So that's the sort of cultural importance of the yellow metal. And if women are willingly coming out and donating their own gold for this, then somewhere the messaging of Iran is percolating through, and this is in the face of the message that I often hear in the Western um, media organizations about the war actually helping the cause of women. It is the women, and I repeat that, underline that, it is the women, at least outside Iran, who are astutely supporting, for now, the Iranian cause, whatever that may be.
All right. So much so for the situation so far politically. What happens to the region? You've talked about all sorts of implications for the region, um, whether it is a huge cash flow crisis because food imports go up and energy exports go down. So cash is not coming in. but cash is going out of the door. So that's a cash flow problem, which could lead to a balance sheet problem as well, because these countries run extremely generous welfare states. You've talked about the big question mark about when it comes to the Gulf to draw talent back into the region, and even more importantly, investment. Talent could probably still go, and the future of Gulf economic model. Indeed, you've also raised the specter of desalination plants no longer surviving the war, and the Gulf turning into a desert again. So paint us a picture of what could happen, what is happening in the Gulf, and what could happen in the Gulf.
So, so Gulf, especially after the global financial crisis of 2008, became an engine of trade finance and economic growth for the ambitious and the impatient amongst all the countries. So often, I know Dubai gets talked about a lot and it's hyped a lot that it's tax free, and everybody wants to go there just to save taxes. And you
You and I
often,
have many friends who moved there.
indeed, 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 like I said, the ambitious and the impatient, those who love it, they love it. And yes, that place has its strengths. There is no denying that.
Yeah.
But the welfare states often did not like that idea. They were like, oh my God, these guys are just escaping the tax net, and Dubai is helping the case along. Well, that's for another day. But whatever it was, the Gulf, especially, now here I would like to tell everyone that, so Iran, although it's in the same Gulf, indeed the Gulf is named Persian Gulf. Um, its geography is unlike the rest of the region. So ex of Iran, most of the Persian Gulf is basically desert land, and there is no viable agriculture. There is no source of fresh water, and also there is no traditional industry there other than hydrocarbons, basically mining hydrocarbons. You have oil wells, you have gas wells, and that's what it is. Now, using that as the base layer, most of these petromonarchies, as we would call them, have tried to diversify amount of success. So countries like UAE, United Arab Emirates, of which Dubai is one of the emirate, have been very successful in diversifying and generating a modern economy, especially when it comes to services, when it comes to establishing industries related to chemicals. So they've done very well, and they've also become a financial sector of
Well,
the world
I'll
in
just
their
stop
own
you
right.
on the financial side. Way back when I was a lawyer in London, this is quite a while ago. Obviously, I'm getting older. Um, they um, they were very conscious about making Dubai a financial center, and my firm at the time, Freshfields Brookhouse Derringer, was helping them come up with templates, with frameworks, with regulations for the financial authorities, just the ecosystem that would enable finance to thrive. And one has to give credit where credit is due. They had a vision, they followed it, and they indeed achieved it. Dubai did emerge as a financial center. But it
Yes,
was a long play. It wasn't something they built like clicking their, clicking their fingers. So some of them, more than others, did make a play for diversification of their economy and did make a play for services, tourism, you name it. So you're spot on. It was a long play. They played the long
yeah,
game.
yeah. So it's not that they woke up one fine day and said, "Okay, everything is tax free," and people just rushed in. No,
Yeah.
it was actually a very well planned and thoughtful diversification of the economy, which paid off dividends, has been paying dividends. But as with other things, there are significant weaknesses, or I would say vulnerabilities. And those vulnerabilities stem from the geography of the region. Primarily, you have lack of fresh water, so they have to depend upon desalination plants. Lack of food growing regions, so most of their food is imported. They cannot grow their own food. And third is the proximity to some of the hottest geopolitical uh, battles that are ongoing currently, be it Syria, be it Iraq, be it and now Iran.
Yeah.
So you have a fairly tumultuous region that has been trying to diversify its economy and become the playground for the global capital, but at the
I mean,
same time,
look, I mean, you've
Go ahead.
mentioned something super important. I mean, uh, very few people who have traveled, and I travel a fair bit, can say that any airlines, except say Singapore Airlines and maybe a few East Asian airlines, can match, say, Qatar Airlines, Emirates,
Emirates, yeah.
and the connectivity is par excellence from Dubai and even Qatar now. And yet, Qatar has sent its planes off into storage in France. Despite running a top operation,
Yeah.
despite having very good on-flight service, despite having a very good hub for connectivity, because if you fly to Africa, you fly to Dubai and then as I did many a time, you fly to Dubai and then you fly to Africa. You fly to India, you fly to Dubai or Qatar, and you can fly to India or further on.
Yeah.
But those advantages have now turned into disadvantages, because now flying through those airports is extremely dangerous. Over to you, Manu.
And this is precisely what Iran has chosen to weaponize.
Yeah.
So when Iran was attacked, it that okay, fine, what is within our grasp? And within their grasp was a very lucrative uh, sector of the global economy, or region of the global economy, and they went um, hammer and tongs at it. Number one. Number two, they went ahead and hit the surveillance and reconnaissance equipment of the US Israeli alliance that was positioned in these very countries. So, overall, what Iran was able to do is hit
So
out an
let me
economic
stop. Draw that. Number one, you said they unleashed economic warfare. So they said, okay,
yes,
yeah, you have far greater conventional military strength, but we can play an asymmetric game. Let's play asymmetric war. So close the Strait of Hormuz, jack the oil and gas price up, and the fertilizers price up too. So jack up all the inputs, not just for agriculture but industry, everything derived from petrochemicals, and hit all the economies of the region, the Gulf economies of the region, which are hubs, transport hubs, as well as service hubs for the EMEA region, let's say, emerging, uh, um, uh, markets of, Africa, Asia, etc. Or and At the same time, they hit American military bases and their very expensive equipment,
yes,
and caused billions of dollars of damage. Would that be a
yes.
fair
And
summary?
yes, that would be a fair summary. And especially, let me add another layer to the economic warfare argument here. That
Yes,
for
please.
for the average citizen on the street in the West, especially, it would look like, while fine, yeah, you
Yeah.
know, Gulf countries got hit. What do I have to do with it? Now, here's the problem. It's a globalized world. And in the globalized world, that the being generated by these newly diversified economies was being pumped or invested in frontier economic activities of Western economies. Now, what's a frontier economic activity? AI, another robotics, another venture capital, whatever the fresh ideas are. So a lot of the capital that was taking up risk and entering sectors which were not easily financeable, from within, especially because we have to understand one thing: post global financial crisis and then COVID pandemic, almost all big countries have been struggling with their budgets. I mean, the very fact that there is a movement called Make America Great again, that tells you a story that somewhere along the way, some things were lost, and there is an
Manu,
attempt to
let me
recover.
shamelessly plug the FOI Geopolitical Risk Monitor here, because we've been covering the debt crises, and our managing partner, Sanjay Acharya, has uh, drawn up a number of figures that illuminate the extent of the debt crisis in the advanced economies. You just pick any name you want, whether it is Japan in the East, or it is France in Europe, or it is the US with $39 trillion of debt. We've just crossed the $39 trillion mark, and we crossed the $39 trillion mark in record time. So there's and this is uh, worrying people, despite the dollar being the reserve currency of the world. So what is important to understand is the other countries where the dollar, we do not have the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, but strained, and capital is not as plentiful as it once was.
And this is where the Gulf was stepping in and helping the other economies out, particularly their so-called
Manu, very quick data point for those who don't follow finance but follow football. Who owns PSG? The Qataris. Who owns Manchester City and facilitates the beautiful football that Pep Guardiola, once of Catalonia, I mean, still from Catalonia, once the great coach of Barcelona, plays? The Emirates Group. Who owns Newcastle United? Well, it's the Saudis. I could go on, but you get the point. Over to you, Manu.
Yeah. So when Iran is choosing to hit out at these petromonarchies, it's hitting out at that capital flow, which will eventually begin to hurt the middle class and the working class across the developed economies. That's first point. The other point is that because of the destruction cost to the infrastructure in these countries, they would sell their assets in other countries, in other territories, to bring the money back home to rebuild. So that would also cause some amount of asset depreciation within the developed countries. Now, one of the very straight up ways in which this can manifest is real estate. You have a lot of real estate being bought in developed countries by Gulf economies and their citizens. So it's not merely the states or the state budgets that are helping, but also the rich citizens of these countries that are investing in other economies. And all of that would suffer if the conflict goes on. And this is what Iran planned. That
Let me
it,
make it really tangible. There are large parts of London, if you walk around London, where Gulf money has poured in, where you'll find lots of Arab families spending time, eating at restaurants, so on and so forth. Now that the Gulf monarchies are not getting that regular cash flow through the sale of oil and gas and fertilizers and chemicals and so on and so forth, at the same time they are having to spend money on food, at the same time as they are still giving out generous welfare to their citizens, because their citizens have been used to it. They cannot just cut them off, otherwise they'd face social revolution, or sorry, social upheaval and even political revolution. So their expenses continue, and even after things end, they will have to spend on reconstruction. maybe, just maybe, there won't be as much money to buy more London fancy apartments, and maybe they may even have to sell some of their apartments. That is precisely what Manu is talking about.
Okay. So, so now when we are in this crisis, if one may say, uh, the way out now is becoming complicated by the day, because what we see is that when the desalination plant or the energy infrastructure of Iran is being threatened, they are talking about, disrupting bigger and bigger infrastructure projects in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, Fujairah. Now, one may say, well, then that's the way of conflict. That's how conflict works. There is destruction. But the problem with some of these projects is that they are incredible pieces of engineering. The engineers and the companies, in fact, the tooling that was used to create some of the machinery that operates is perhaps no longer in existence. So, if replacements have to be found out of, for example, the Ras Lafar gas refinery was targeted in Qatar, and some of the equipment, like the air separator units, like the gas to liquid machinery, those are incredibly complicated and specialized pieces of equipment, and replacement may take years, if not a decade. Now, what that means effectively for the rest of the world is that there would be shortages of not only energy inputs, but also inputs that are created downstream of energy mining. And I'll give you an example of that. So, for example, one of the things is helium production, which is used in semiconductor manufacturing. Now, helium is a very specialized gas, and it's not easy to produce. Qatar used to be a good provider of that to Taiwan, which is a big manufacturer of semiconductors. Then we can talk about fertilizers. Now, fertilizer manufacturing requires huge amount of energy and also gas. Again, same problem. We may run short of fertilizers in the near future. Then a very interesting a byproduct of oil refining is sulfur, and sulfur is used to produce sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid is heavily used to refine base metals and other metals, and most importantly copper, which is the base layer for most of the refrigeration, air conditioning, and other cooling equipments that are used for even your GPUs that are used to mine the bitcoins or to run the AI software. So what we are looking at is a very big crisis in which we will run short of minerals and materials that were hitherto not, constricted. Now, this is a world that nobody is prepared for. And this is why the conflict is taking a bigger turn than just being a regional conflict. So this is totally unlike.
Manu, we'll get into it in our next video. In the
Yeah.
interests of time, the
Mhm.
important thing for our viewers and listeners is to understand that uh, Iran has unleashed economic warfare. Iran has survived. So have Israel and the US. But the Gulf monarchies, the Gulf petromonarchies, are under enormous strain. They face a cash flow crisis. This could lead to a
Correct.
balance sheet crisis. And the economics go far beyond the Gulf monarchies. There are spillover effects. The Gulf monarchies could financially have distressed asset sales of their Western assets, whether it is shares, whether it is real estate, whether it is bonds, and the Gulf monarchies now can no longer provide not just oil and gas and LNG and LPG and fertilizers, but also inputs crucial to the global economy, the modern global economy, whether it is helium, whether it is sulfur, whether it is anything you can think of, if you know modern day industry and the modern day interlinkages. Manu, would that be fair to as a summary?
Yes, yes, yes.
Good. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back with an episode completely dedicated to the global economy. We'll go into great lengths, and we will gain from the benefit of Manu's insights and knowledge and experience. Until then, thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure you press the bell icon so that you get videos like this. And make sure you go to our website and subscribe to our newsletter. Every single video we do has a transcript there, and you can skim through it if you don't have time to listen to us prattling along. Ladies and gentlemen, we try to bring you insights from knowledgeable people, from interesting people. We'll be back with more discussions on the Gulf, on the war. Thank you very much.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.